All right, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Welcome. I am Nichelle Grandison from Strategy Plus Consulting. I'm your host today. And this is the second of our strategy series webinars leading up to our 2022 annual Caribbean Summit, or what we call the CSS for short. So look out for more. I think we're supposed to have one more webinar in September. So check us out on LinkedIn, whether it's on the BSI page or on mine, and you should be able to get that link for that final webinar. And we'll talk a little bit more about the CSS, that summit, at the end of this presentation. And I know everyone is busy, so let's jump right in. Today, we're going to learn how to assess strategy management maturity and how important it is in maximizing the outcomes for your corporate strategy. So without further ado, it's my privilege, my honor, to hand you over to Mr. Joe DiCarlo, who is our Senior Vice President of the Strategy Management Group and the Balanced Scorecard Institute by extension. So Joe.
Thank you very much, Nichelle, and welcome everyone. Thank you for taking the time out to sit in on this webinar. Of course, it's being recorded and there'll be a link available at the end of the webinar, and you'll be notified of what that link is. A little bit today about what we're going to talk about. First thing is I'm going to talk about the various dimensions of the strategic management maturity model. There's one thing to say you're strategically mature and managing the strategy, and then there's another aspect to this is what level of maturity or maturity level are you in at the present time and looking to be in the future. We're going to talk about how to conduct the assessment, and I'm going to give you some tips along the way for each step about how you can do that. And I'm going to say how you can use the assessment information to close the gaps. Since this is on a scale of 1 to 5, your firm, you have no idea where it's going to fall into in that scale of 1 to 5. And when you get it back, the first questions you're going to ask is, well, I'm a level 1 in maturity on this. How do I get to level 2? And I'm going to give you some pointers about how to do that. And then we'll look at some examples of success gained by using the continuous improvement of the strategic management maturity assessments. And I think that's the key word here that I've experienced over the 10 plus years that I've been running these SMMAs, either at client locations or through webinars or through coaching and advisory phone calls about what is it you need to do on a yearly basis after you get the baseline set. What do you need to do on a yearly basis to see if you're making any progress going forward? Now, one of the things I thought about on this particular webinar, typically any of you that sat in on my other webinars, I usually start with the foundation leading up to the success. Well, I decided on this one, we're going to start with the end in mind. We're going to show you some of the success examples and then go back and talk about each maturity level, each dimension, and what it took to get that successful. So and I also wanted to change the theme of this webinar. You know, we all live in a computerized digits, zeros and ones, screens, all this kind of business. And what it dawned on me was and when I work with clients, I sometimes get this feeling they understand and they nod their head that they understand what they have to do in order to become more strategically successful, but they can't get their hooks into it visually, even if they're looking at dashboards or anything like that, because again, that's just pixels and a whole bunch of zeros and ones that are being out there. So I wanted to put a theme in this that literally shows you that there's a lot of moving parts, the strategy execution and the maturity of strategy execution once you've got the execution built. So I decided to go back into my way back past when we used to race cars. And this is a perfect example of how you can see that there's many what I call engines of performance and engines of execution that goes on at an organization when you get ready to launch your strategy. So the first one is the organization-wide strategy. When you come in and you want to sit down and do the organization-wide strategy, those of you that took the courses from the BSI know that we call that tier 1. You're looking at just the overall organization. It's the big tent that the senior executives are meeting with some of the directors and some of the employees at certain levels, and they're saying, where do we want to be 3 to 5 years from now? And what is it that we're going to measure to do that? That doesn't last very long because, first off, you can't claim an aligned strategy if you're not aligned across the entire organization. So the next thing you have to look at is if you're a holding company and you have a whole series of lines of business, you're not only going to be executing the organization-wide strategy, but you're going to be executing the line of business. Now, I also put the department down there. If you're not a holding company, just a very straightforward organization-wide departments, and then down to the teams and individuals, that's pretty straightforward. You're going to cascade or align that strategy down to those lines of business or departments. Well, next, you're going to also then have not only the departments or lines of business executing, but you're also going to have, I gotta get these guys started here. You're going to have the lines of business and the departments, and now you've got the teams and individuals executing as well. So in just this simple example, of 3 lines of business or departments, 3 sets of teams, individual objectives, the organization-wide, you've got at least 9 different engines of performance that are going on that you need to make sure that you've got the right maturity level across what we consider to be the dimensions that are needed to be successful in strategic management maturity. So when we look at this, we have 5 levels: ad hoc, static, as far as maturity levels, reactive, structured and proactive, managed and focused, and continuous improvement. I think you can pretty well read between the lines of what those words mean, but you're going to see some detail put to those as we get into the next couple of slides. But we feel, and it just so happens that this exhibit with these pistons in this engine track perfectly to our 8 dimensions, because this is an 8-cylinder V8 engine video. And they start with the leadership. If the leadership's not leading the way, reinforcing it, this is a non-starter for basic purposes. Culture and value. What is the culture value? Can you see the values being executed in your company every day? Is the culture strong? Is it weak? Is it combative? Is it toxic? What is it that you have to take a look at? Are you doing strategic thinking and planning throughout the year so that you stay on top of what's the performance outputs and what you need to do to make changes? Here's the alignment. That's the alignment through these other RPM gauges here on the left and right. And you're cascading those objectives down to the teams and individuals, and also to the departments and lines of business. You're going to have to start measuring performance. There's no question about it. You can't get around this. I mean, you're going to set some KPIs, key performance indicators, or some indices that are going to measure a whole bunch of things, and you're going to have to eventually set targets that says, are we making progress? You're going to have to manage the performance reporting process. And this gets into collecting the data, putting out the dashboards, putting out the reports, and fundamentally reporting on what's going on with your overall strategy. Process management or process improvement, that's critical going forward as well. And then sustainability. Now, this sustainability, by the way, is not ESG. This is sustainability of executing the strategy on an annual basis over and over and over again. Now, the one interesting thing about that process improvement is I've got some clients who have very purposely cranked down hard on 1, leadership, 2, cultures, 3, strategic thinking, got the alignment solidified, got the performance measurement solidified, and you've got the performance management solidified, and they're good on process improvement and sustainability. But what happens is they reach a threshold, and the executives and the board start asking, hey, this is working the way we wanted it designed, and it's working the way we thought it would, but how do we get more performance out of the strategy? And typically number 7 is the first place we go and look at to see what kind of processes need to be modified, changed, let go, bring new ones in, etc. So it's a fine-tuning process that goes on with the process improvement. So let's take a look at what this looks like in terms of the grid, and what this looks like in terms of, now we do all of this online. We actually offer proposals to do this for the clients that want to have this done. And that's interesting aspect about that, because you can do it yourself. You know, you can take this material, it's out on our website. You can do this yourself. But one of the things we find consistently is, and in fact, I just had one client tell me this. They said, you know, you said you wanted me to send out all the email notices about this. And I said, yes, typically that's what my clients do. And they said, no, we want you to send them out because they have to know that you're managing this process and reporting on it. That tells me right away they want a clear vision from the employee side that says this is not another local management thing. This is local management going out to this organization, SMG or BSI, and they're running it for us. So you have to keep that in mind, and you're going to see some reasons why that's a big hurdle in some organizations. There are the 8 dimensions down the left-hand side, and there's the strategic management maturity gauges across the top. So as you can probably surmise, ad hoc and static is red. You would think in this day and age, a lot of organizations, a lot of connectivity internet-wise, crowdsourcing, social media and everything, this wouldn't be a problem. One of the examples you're going to show, they've got 2 or 3 red boxes in this right here. The next thing is reactive. Well, it's not exactly good, but it's a start better than red. And it's reactive as to what's happening. And I'm not going to read those cells to you, but I'm going to let you read those on your leisure. Structured and proactive talks about, now we got a little bit more substance in place, but we still have to have some changes going ahead to get into the next levels. Manage and focus. Now we start in with this empowerment. You've got the right processes are tracked and documented, and you've got a formal strategy management office that's running the strategy. And I say running, they're coordinating the strategy, because one of the things that's very required in strategy is that there are owners of objectives, results, and projects, not somebody who's tagged as the strategy management office. They make sure that's reported. So level 5, everybody, every organization, every CEO, executive suite, every department head, directors, et cetera, they want to be level 5. Of course, that's nirvana out there. You walk in every day and everybody knows exactly what to do, how to do it, how to get problems squashed, and how to get resolution on things, and things move forward without much thinking. As I started to say, there was only one organization I worked for where that was present the day I walked in the door, and that was IBM Corporation when I started in 1985. A little background history. At that time, IBM was putting out products and software and services almost every month. Something was new, was coming down the pipeline. It was also the beginning, if you check your history books, back to the PCs. PCs were coming online in 85 and 86. And it just seemed that when I was planted into a team, the 2-person team, we all knew in the department that we were working in our particular division, General Systems Division, everybody knew who to go and get the results, how to get help, how to get a resolution, and keep things moving forward. It was a great place to work. There was no question in my mind. And it was so great, this little tiny General Systems group in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, became the #1 branch in 1987. And so that's how much this level 5 continuous improvement was also being triggered. The problem is these days, when we do this SMA analysis and you get into this red column, orange column, a yellow column, executives just want to shoot straight forward to level 5. So what you do is you come up with something like this. Here's the results of a SMA analysis. Came out and said, you got 3 boxes in red and you got 4 boxes in, or cells in orange. Not great. Could be all red, so it's not terrible, but it's not great. But what do you need to do to move to level 5? Well, the first point is, I tell them you can't do that overnight. You cannot even do that in a year. You probably cannot even do it in 2 years, because look at the change that needs to be done in each of those cells to the right of any of those arrows that are shown there. I mean, to move leaders dictate but gather feedback sporadically to a level 3, you have to make sure there's engagement going on, because if there had been engagement going on, it wouldn't be orange. It would be over here in yellow. So they got an engagement problem. And then once they get that solved, they got to get into the empowerment issue to go. And then when they get to the level 5 from there, they got to get everybody engaged from top to bottom on looking at what needs to be done for the organization. Some things are even, when we start with a red box over here on no data, only ad hoc performance measures are collected, you got to regularly collect performance data, but you got to make sure it's not operational, but a combination of operational and strategic. So again, my advice here is when you go through the analysis, and if you come up with your colorization on the cells, always think about what you're going to do maybe in the next year or 2 years to get to the next cell or the next cell. Now, here's an example of one of my clients that has been doing this now for 5 years. So in year 1, they came out with an average of 2.31. Okay, halfway, not halfway into orange, and maybe get out the yellow in level 3. So the first year, you can see the numbers there, rock bottom on some of those 2s. And second year, they went from, this was an interesting, and this sometimes happens. They were leadership 2.4 in year 1, but they dropped to 2.1 in year 2. Somebody might say, well, how did that happen? Well, any ebb and flow of business has some things that divert your attention on some short-term things that you have to fix plus the long-term. So you can see right away they recovered that ground in year 3 when they went up to a 2.8. They also had another one on here on process improvement. They went from a 2.4 to a 1.8 and a 1.9 because they had, I remember this explicitly, they had a real problem with documentation on processes. So you start measuring this over a period of years and you'll start to see that spider diagram get closer to the green, which is the perfect world of a 5.0. They're doing very well. They're happy with what their SMMA results have been each year, and they're getting better. They know where they're going to work and where to put the attention going forward. So let's talk about that first maturity level, ad hoc and static. First of all, you're going to see the later slides after this one. I've got some highlight yellow in there because it's going to draw my attention to make sure I mention those to you during this presentation. You don't see any yellow here because this is all bad. I mean, there's no strategy. There's no tactical operational directions because that sign is great. The other way, that way, this way, nobody really knows what's going on. Here is the strategy business is that it's done by the execs and they literally either email it to you or they slide it under your door. And the last thing is you're always fighting fires. This is classic ad hoc. And it never seems, and you never really find same time to talk about long-term strategy. This one, the key one here is that at least in reactive, you started to have some strategic elements in planning put in place. You still have problems like the last bullet, the activities are done by individuals to meet a routine policy need and are not taken seriously. That's why that picture on the far right, they're all asleep. And the business also here sometimes is that second to last bullet, they use KPI performance or performance output to punish underperformers as opposed to gathering together, see what they need to do to let the objective get better as opposed to putting it all on the backs of the person. Structured and proactive, level 3. Now we're starting to get a little bit more on track. And if you remember, structured 3 is structured and proactive is pretty close to the middle. The key things here is accountability is now in place. And in accountability is, you can see it on that last picture, it drives employee motivation. You got things like accountability, promotion, growth, reward, success, empowerment, and education. So you're doing something to keep the employees busy and understanding what they need going forward. Measurements are somewhat aligned to the strategy, and I put a qualifier in here. It's the strategic objectives. And you probably saw when I talked about lines of business or departments from tier 1, the organization-wide. Now it's coming down to the teams and individuals as being a part of their annual plan for each year. Manage and focus. Now we're really close. We're getting close to level 5. And this can be represented by these particular photos here, which are strategies in place. That drives a focus that keeps everyone focused on what the objectives are at all levels. The key words here is you don't look back. You're not going back that way again. But here, more importantly, is the trust aspect. One of the things that you'll look at when you do any analysis for creating strategies is sometimes you're going to have to get down to discussions about, what is it that makes our workforce motivated? What is it that we have to put in place to keep them motivated? And one of the aspects that doesn't get talked about a lot is what is the trust level of the workforce with the leaders? By the way, leaders in my dictionary for strategy is not only the executives, not only the lines of business directors, not only the department heads, but it's anyone who's leading a team of people. So if you have a supervisor or you have a team leader, they are just as much in that trust bucket as some of the higher level execs are, because those people that they're leading are looking to them to lead them in a secure and a forward motion that they'll all be successful. So this drives everything about employee engagement here. So you have to make sure that there's this high level of trust in place, and there are devices and instruments and techniques to measure that so you can get a hand on it going forward. Continuous improvement wraps it all together. You have annual strategic planning. You embed that. That's now embedded in the culture. You run conducts regular analysis on the objectives, regular analysis on the plan and management. And then you have all the things in regards to, is the organization performing toward its strategic objectives? How is it performing? And then second is how effective the strategic planning and processes are to adapt as necessary. And you can see the kind of things that goes on from a high performance organization attributes in that photograph on the right. Now, leadership. As in strategy, the first time executives come in to create that first strategy at the corporate level or tier one, organization wide, it's all leadership. Everybody says leadership. Yeah, I know who that is. That's the CEO, that's a COO, that's a CIO, CFO, all those guys are getting together, putting the strategy together. Well, that's true. But what happens when they get that done and they say, okay, you guys, you got to cascade this down to the lines of business or the departments? They think they're passing the ball or the baton to them. That is absolutely incorrect. You're passing them the ball or the baton to execute on a set of objectives and KPIs that they'll design for their line of business or their department, but everyone still needs to stay engaged at every level. Plus, you got a whole new set of leaders coming in for the lines of business or the departments. So everybody has to stay visible and engaged. In fact, in one of our classes, we have like a sphere that's sliced up, and I believe into 8 levels. The very top one, engaged leadership. Because if this engagement at the leadership level, I don't care what level in the organization is not present, your strategy is destined not to be successful. You have to trust and encourage employees to contribute. Got to get open door, open line of communications, open crowdsourcing of ideas so that they know that they have a say in what's happening to the organization. And I couldn't resist putting this quote in. My wife is troubled by when we go to the movies because I'm always listening to the lines and thinking I got to use that in some of my training classes. But there was this line from G.I. Jane in 1997. It said, "Remember, there are no bad teams." I forgot to put the word bad in there. Only bad leaders. And I adapted that for this script, but the line was actually, "Remember, there are no bad crews. There are only bad leaders." But that doesn't make any difference what type of organization it is. Those leaders, team leaders, supervisors, department heads, SFOs, CFOs, CIOs, CEOs, they are leaders. So they have to make sure that they don't become the problem and while the organization wants to be led. So consequently, some of the course of action that you need to think about when you design or you see that this is a problem, you start with this question. Who are the leaders when it comes to building and executing strategy? Start there. And then keep in mind this article from Harvard, which says, is the title, "Why Should Anyone Be Led by You?" Well, their research down at the bottom, Coffey and Jones, showed that there were 4 things. They said unexpected. I just heard that. I was talking to someone else this morning that just talked about this weaknesses thing on the phone. And I said, well, this is coincidental. I was just going to be talking about that on this webinar. They selectively show their weaknesses. Why is that good to do? Well, it's that approachability and humanity thing on the far end. In fact, back in the 70s, when I first started working for the university, there was a book that is still very popular today called, I'm blanking out on it. I can see the title and I can see the cover. Anyway, it was the first evidence of something called managing by wandering around. And at that time, of course, we were all in brick and mortar structures. This is back in the 70s. And all the departments were pretty well housed. In Search of Excellence was the book. And they had this managing by wandering around, which said, you know what? You should not rely just on your scheduled meetings to get work done. Executive, manager, team leader, wander around and go unannounced, unscheduled to your colleagues' offices to see what is happening, what problems there are, et cetera. I started applying that in the 70s, and I swear in this off, I had about 30 some people reporting to me. And we had scheduled meetings where everybody would get together and talk about what's on the agenda and that kind of thing. But the rest of the time, I took the advantage every 10 o'clock every morning just to wander around with a cup of coffee and stop in somebody's office and say, hey, Nichelle, is there anything we should talk about? Is there anything that's going to heat up that we can, dampen it right now or anything like that? And pretty soon they all expected me to come to their office at some point in time. What that was doing was it's showing the approachability. I also had it in reverse. You have any questions? You want to do it impromptu? My door's always open. If the door's open, just pop in and say, we'll handle it. If it's closed, that means I'm either on a heavy call or I got somebody else in the office. So it's approachability on the weaknesses side. The other thing is this ability to collect, interpret soft data. That is what? 7 words that could be boiled down to stop and listen, leader. Many times this is a problem that most leaders understand. They want to use their position power to talk. They need to use their position power to listen. That's where the soft data they'll get their information fed to them. Yes, there has to be some tough empathy. I mean, this is akin to tough love in those relationship or home situations or whatever. But it really is, you have to care for them and you let them know everybody wants them to do well, but you have to make sure that there are boundaries on that going forward. And last but not least, I always have different. With those 30 people, I always had differences, and especially in the fundraising side. I was a new kid on the block. I was late 20s, early 30s, and all the rest of them were in their late 30s or 40s. And so I always had differences about what we wanted to do on fundraising, but we got it on the table, got it on the chalkboard, whatever at that time, and we ironed it out because it's the unique ideas that everybody brings to the table that makes leadership doable. Next dimension is culture and values. Well, this comes straight down to the principles and practices by the leadership. The principles and practices of the leadership should be driven by the values of the organization. Now, I just finished up working with a board and the executive branch of a corporation, and the board was very emphatic from past designs that they brought in the values that the corporation is going to follow. They all were good. There was no question, except we found out somehow, and reading some of the corporate documents, they had introduced a second set of values. Now that was getting confusing. So they're straightening that out, but they're all good values, but got to keep it out. But the executives knew that there had to be a change there. Ownership has got to get anchored in tightly on the culture and values and strategy maturity. Participation has to be at all levels, not just the executive suite, not just the department directors, not just the department heads, all levels. There's that trust business again, and transparency has to communicate. I just released a paper about 2-3 months ago on the essentials of strategy communications. That's not rocket science. It's just common sense. It takes time to do it, but it's common sense. And flexibility and willingness to change. Anybody that's got their feet in concrete today, sayonara, because that concrete is going to hold you in a position you can't retain going forward because of the speed of technology and environment issues and the employee workforces. Those are the three big drivers going forward. And you got to make sure that there's, you know, adherence to the stated values and policies. Can you see them being executed on a daily basis? Now, this is an interesting course of action because I picked it because of their culture is not the culprit. A lot of organizations will say, our culture is toxic. Well, the first question would be, and I've seen that on responses to the SMMA assessments, they literally put it in there. And so when I raised it to the executives, I said, why would they say this? Well, there's been some past incidents, this, that, and the other thing. So now we're dragging through what I call the dirty laundry from the history. But when we started talking more about it, they said, people are frustrated because they don't know what the processes are. And these execs that they interviewed in this article flat out said, if you're put new processes or structures in place to tackle the business challenges, reworking an outdated strategy and business model, you'll solve the culture evolves to that work, and you'll cut down on the common problems that not controlled and documented processes drive in an organization. On the left is John Kotter's Change book on the 8 errors and 8 steps to success to implement change. Because, by the way, strategy is by itself a change process. Make no bones about it. Even if you have an existing strategy, you're changing something typically on an annual basis as you go through the review process. Look at what he says about communications. One of the problems is under communicating the vision, let's say strategy, by a factor of 10, 100, or even 1,000. The 8-step process, 8-step implement change, communicating the strategy. What's the laws of how many times you have to say something before somebody gets it? Typically, the general benchmark is around 7. Well, guess what? If you've got a 15 strategic objective strategy, you got 15 weeks of chance to communicate about each one of those objectives individually without having to report about all of them at one time. Yeah, to get it in 12 months, you got to put 2 on some months, 2 on another month, but you can get them all in. The other thing is, this is something I don't find that's done very often, but I think it's very valuable, is focus groups. You know, when it talked about communicating and empowering and getting everybody engaged, a focus group is a great way to do that. Standard set of questions that a team makes up, what they're looking for, and potential responses, and they get small groups together. 2 or 3 people busily write the notes, and they assimilate them together, and now they get good standard output from their employee group. You can start doing some more communications, and you know, if you don't have any values, you got to get a values development program put in place. Strategic planning, thinking and planning. Well, the key thing here is their first highlight. Too many organizations spend a lot of time strategically planning what they think is strategy, and all they do is that the end outcome is they have a whole bunch of projects and initiatives, no objectives, no KPIs, no measurements. Oh yeah, we're executing our strategy. We're getting these projects done. Projects are not performance improvement. That's getting a project done that has a start date and end date, and that's it. And you can measure, obviously, if that's being done on time and on budget and other things. Keep in mind, on strategic objectives, there's 2 streams of influence. The KPI, or the measurement you're going to put against it to show success, and the initiative and the projects that go through. The other thing here is there's no reason why there cannot be a new source of ideas coming into any organization these days with too much access to crowdsourcing capabilities very inexpensively. So that means you put out a question, you let them respond, it gets collected, people analyze it and say, here's what they're thinking about the answers to this question. How do we want to proceed? And management makes a decision. And then over time, you've got to make this linkage of planning to the budgeting. In other words, those projects that get identified as strategic need to get into a budget plan for the year that are protected, because now they have, as a result, an impact on the objective that they're attached to. If they don't, you could cripple your strategy in the long run. Here's a course of action for that. Well, you can start looking at alternate strategy techniques like foresight analysis, scenario planning, or inflection point. You don't want to miss an inflection point in your business because you'll never get it again. Something that was critical and teaching your growth, realizing your growth curve, and all of a sudden it goes up again. What was that inflection point? What drove it? What about the old use of a SWOT analysis? One of the things that I think some of the students and my clients look at me kind of funny when I say, okay, we're going to talk about designing your strategy for tier 1 and tier 2s, but guess what? I only want you to look at the challenges column, the weaknesses and the threats. First of all, you're not going to stop doing what you are strong in right now. That would be almost idiotic. I mean, you got things in there that are good, unless there's some big reason to stop doing them. So they're going to be carried over. It's these weaknesses that people carry over year after year after year and don't fix. And remember, they're internal, so they have total control on those. The threats are some things you can identify, but you got to maneuver your strategy around it. You got to put some kind of actions in place. It says, if this happens, we'll do this. If that happens, we'll do that. And of course, any opportunities that are identified, you're going to take into a case. That's strategic thinking and planning. The other thing is this product image relationship. This is the customer value proposition. My clients report to me that on an annual review of their strategy year, the SWOT and the customer value proposition is what changes the most. And in this day and age, with technology and services capabilities all done by the internet, you can bet those attributes are driving a lot of change difference. People want different things. They want it faster, they want it cheaper, and they want it right now. And then, of course, continue to do the SMMA assessment each year. Alignment is flat out aligning the objectives from that corporate level down to the departments or the departments and then down to the individuals. If you're a holding company, you're going to cascade it to those lines of business, and then they are going to do a cascading down inside of those lines of business. So you got to take a look at what's motivating the employees, what's happening, what do they need to do, understanding and supporting their job, and are they self-motivated or empowered, not merely by compliance to rules. This is just a graphic that looks what I just said, and it's very explicit to talking about only the objectives come down. A lot of organizations try to say, oh, no, we're going to take the objectives and the KPIs from the corporate wide or tier organization wide and cascade those down. No, it's only the objectives, because at the tier 2 level, those departments or lines of business have got their own objectives, some of which will support the ones at tier 1, but many of them are very synonymous to their department or their line of business. And then, of course, the tier 3s can be in a number of things. And this is now these days where you get into things like OKRs, SMART goals, et cetera, at the tier 3 level. Performance measurement, focus on the outcome and results. Nice way of saying, I don't want to measure how much money goes into an input. I don't want to measure how many students were trained. I want to take a look at what the output was from that. That's still operational. You have to move that out to an intended outcome, either intermediate or final outcome. Now, you're going to take some of those operational measures and create indices out of those. Then they can be used in a strategic manner for an objective. You have to make sure that you're collecting the information frequently enough. I will say it categorically here, the days of the annual employee satisfaction, customer satisfaction surveys is dead. The reason being that all the best practices are that you pulse that with a significant sample size of the population on a regular basis, typically quarterly or sometimes monthly, then you can get real-time results that come in from those. But when I see clients or students create annual, I said, absolutely not, red line. And that's why it's because you're not collecting it soon enough to do anything with it. You have to have a balanced set, okay, of things across the organization. And by the way, if you use teams of people to do short-term projects, you better have a mechanism to analyze their performance as a team and report that back to their direct manager, so that manager can take his or her look at that and say, well, okay, you did well reporting when you were working for me for this first 9 months, and you went to this team and they seem to like you too. So I think that's great. Here's your final evaluation. There's still a lot of organizations that send people to work on teams and don't get back results from putting person A with person B with person C and D. And all they know is they got that done. They asked the manager, did the project finish? Yes. Were you happy? Yes. Well, what about talking about the individuals that were there and giving them some kind of recognition for that? Here's on performance management. Here's another thing. We get a lot of requests from organizations that say, come in and do a set of KPIs for us. So my first question typically is, okay, do you have a current strategy plan now? No. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a heads up. All KPIs are based on some kind of strategic intent. So you've got to have strategic objectives designed in order to create the intended result that creates the KPIs. Others will say, yeah, we've got a series of objectives or goals. I'll say, fine, let's take a look at them. What is it that you're looking for KPIs for? And we talk more about it. But this is the family. They're usually a family of KPIs that come out of that process. Performance management is basically taking the metrics and making sure that they're using the decision-making. You will not believe to this day, you'll create the dashboards. Those owners will look at the reports. They get to quarterly meetings for the first 3 quarters, and they just flash it up on the screen. They say, here's what's happening. Okay, and somebody doesn't want to either challenge them or doesn't want to venture outside the box, so to speak, and they'll just let it pass. You've got to make sure that they are using it to make decisions. Otherwise, they will just fall into the comfort of just taking the data as it is. You have to get a performance management system to do that. And I mean something that's cloud-based. If you've got the resources in IT, you can bring it behind your firewall. But my message here on this one is Excel to do corporate-wide, cascaded down to tier 2s, down to the departments, down to the lines of business, and then down to the individuals is nonsensical. It just doesn't work, because you might as well hire 5-10 people just to manage the data collection using Excel. Get yourself into some kind of performance management system, because you also not only amp up the reporting capability, and it's done on a regular basis. Downstream, when you connect these databases all up, you don't even have to do anything except tell it on this date at this time, I want you to go out to these tables and pull that information in, and it reports. And it puts the briefing books together for you because you designed them. That can't be done like that as well with Excel. Sure, size of organization makes a difference, but the thing is, most of these organizations that provide these also have low-cost solutions in the cloud. I've even told some clients, get just one seat in one of these and just try it out. They've always come back to me and said, you were right. This was really good. So now they're expanding it to more owners throughout the organization. Process improvement right here. First thing is you have to document. How many are documented? If I were to ask everyone on this call, are your processes all documented? I'm sure some of you are going to be shaking your head no, because that's typically what transpires. Do you have benchmarks in place that are the reasonable benchmarks? They're close? Probably not so many. I am very unabashed about recommending the APQC, American Productivity and Quality Center. I've gone into a lot of organizations that had this problem with process management, and I said, look, spend time checking out this organization. One of them was with the Armed Forces Digital Media, the media group. And while she was sitting, I was talking about this, and I could see her busy on the keyboard. And she says, I got it. She said, of course, the government was licenses for everybody. And I checked with her at the end of the week, and she said, I can tell you right now, I've looked at that. That's probably going to save me 6 to 9 months on a lot of things I'm working on. It's just a resource. You could got your own resources. You can do whatever you want. Another organization will change their whole process improvement side by using this particular set of tools from APQC. Last but not least, sustainability. And that comes around very heavy duty with that first highlight. I send out a list at the end of a project when we get done with each tier 1, tier 2, and I put up the title of the document is X number of reasons why you should pause before you launch your new strategy, especially at tier 1. Some organizations, they only got like 8 things on there, 5 things. Some have got 10, some have got 12. And one of the items that I put in it, because it was never really talked about a lot, I just got head nods that said, oh yeah, we got reward and recognition systems. So I worded the question this way. The status of your reward, recognition, and incentive programs barely have a pulse. Nice way of saying they're dead, but I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. Because when you start enacting change, when you get down to that tier 3 levels of teams and individuals, they're going to be asking, well, okay, I want to do this and it sounds logical and it sounds good, but what's in it for me? You got to think about this going forward. And then, of course, if you're having a fully aligned strategy, you need this Office of Strategic Management. And I mentioned that a little earlier. And what that sustainability, a course of action is you go through these particular imperatives that are listed on this sheet, that you got the plan, you project manage and portfolio manage, you performance report, you operationalize the strategy because you're bringing that stuff into the indexes and your KPIs, you're aligning the entire organization, and you're keeping the leadership engaged. That's strategy successful execution. And I'll stop here, Nichelle, if you want to jump in, but I just encourage you to check out Strategy Plus's Caribbean Strategy Summit coming up in September. And there'll be some more speakers from SMG and BSI there. Nichelle?
So before you hand over, Joe, there were 2 questions.
Okay.
Maybe you can take them briefly before I get in. So
Okay.
one is from Patrick Powers, and he's asking, is it the recommended approach for all dimensions to be at the same level before striving to the next level? Since the 8 dimensions are interconnected, and he has system thinking in brackets, it seems you'd want to keep them aligned and balanced.
Patrick, that's a nice brass ring or gold ring on the merry-go-round. I hope you can reach out and grab it when you go along with everybody's grabbing brass rings at the same time. But the reality is a lot of individual individuals, they just can't keep up with that for any number of reasons. What I like to recommend to a question like that is you stay as closely aligned as possible. One cell away in either direction is not going to break the back of the organization or the individuals, but it will strengthen the strength going forward to those higher maturity levels. Good question, Patrick.
Okay, so the next question is from Greg, and he says in level 3, where employees know their customers and align strategy to those needs, and it appears, is this all employees or leadership only, management only, sales and marketing only, or some combination? And is this program or product specific or company-wide?
Company-wide. Good question. We're measuring this. Your first there's ways you can measure the strategic management maturity. And here's the obvious first way. You can just give this to you can send it out to your entire employee population. Say, give me your reports back on what you think about this. The real gold vein inside of that mining of information comes with when you construct the same document, but because things like SurveyMonkey allows you to create unique links. First thing, by the way, I always recommend totally anonymous. Okay, so make that clear. You can turn that on and off in SurveyMonkey. I always turn it on, totally anonymous. Then you set up special links for executives, next level down, departments, individuals. And now you're going to get a report back measured on the same scale, same questions, already disaggregated by particular, in this case, classification. It's amazing when you look at the results and you see what the execs think about strategy management and maturity where they are, and where even this next level down, it gets even more dispersed down at the lowest level. So that sends a message to management that they got to do a better job of communicating exactly what the organization is looking for. Now,
Is
another
that
tip,
on 10?
I'm sorry.
Not you, Joe, sorry.
The other thing is I would recommend that you do, which is not part of that grid. When you set up the SMMM to do it internally, give every person that's answering the results on that Likert scale from 1 to 5, you ask them, could you give us some insights as to why you chose that level? And it'd be a level of 1 through 5. You can put it optional, and you'll be surprised what you get back in those comment boxes. I've had some come back, like I talked about the toxic business, blatantly, that was coming back. I've even had items come back from individuals, whoever responded at what level, said they were naming names of people that they thought were totally incompetent. And when I broached management with that, they said, yeah, we know that's a problem, we're fixing it. I said, well, all I'm saying is they're not, either if you're telling them you're fixing it, you're taking too long, because they're angry, and it's going to create a problem in your culture going forward, because they'll say management says they'll do something and they never follow up with it. That's a culture killer right there. So yes, use it as a group. You can start at a big level and then start disaggregating it by some kind of a structured manner that you design. Good question.
Okay, great. There's one more from Prince, and he's asking, what is the most basic pragmatic step applicable for leaders to execute strategy?
Basic, most practical way they can execute strategy is once they get up. Well, first of all, once they make a big deal of saying they're sponsoring the build of a strategy for the company or the organization, and obviously they have to commit resources and time. The next thing is when they get a product out, and everybody that had get a lot of people, get a lot of voices in the room. The way we do it is the sponsors get a lot of strategic elements that they have to design, but then they have to turn over. And I heard this mentioned in one question about the themes. When the executive management says these are our 3 or 4 or 5 strategic themes, which are things that we have to be wildly successful over the course of the strategy, turn that down to the lower levels. Get subject matter experts, movers and shakers, people that really are engaged. And now you're going to have about 20, 30, 40 people below the executive suite that was pulled into the process. And they will be your go-to champions. You saw that on one of their slides earlier. They will be the ones because they were part of the process. And then each year during that 4th quarter deep dive that you're reporting on the strategy and making a change, you invite them in to look at what's being changed and looked at. That drives culture deepening wider and deeper than anything else that I've seen. You invite them back. You keep them, of course, for praise during the year with strategy communications, but to invite them back and say, here's what we think is happening next year, that's golden. That will pay you dividends that you can't even put a price on.
Okay, we have a few more. Well, now I'll try to answer what I can in the chat, but the next one is Joe, I see 5 levels. Understanding that the result should be an entire number, but I saw evaluation numbers like 2.4. How can that be?
Oh, well, now the evaluation of there's one overall score, which is a simple average of all the individual scores of each column or each level. So, ad hoc and level 1 might be a 2.3, level 2 might be a 2.8, and so forth and so forth across, and you just do a simple average, and that's the overall score.
Great. How do you ensure alignment across organization levels without creating resource strain due to competing priorities? And that's from Lakeisha.
Well, that's, by the way, that's one of the main tasks of the strategy management office. They first of all set out, what the corporate level or the organization wide needs to do each year in terms of refreshing KPIs and targets and setting a watchdog on projects and initiatives. Then if this cascaded down to the tier 2s, the same thing goes down there. And the department heads, they're going to create their strategy for the department. They're going to have people tasked inside the department to act as owners to watch certain objectives and KPIs and be on project teams, et cetera. The key thing is to make sure that alignment stays in place. You can't just issue an email to the department head and say, okay, your plan is due by this date, or I've been watching the system and I'm not seeing any data coming in for your KPIs. What's the problem? I'll never forget one ministry that I was working on offshore, and the ministry head called us one day in the project office and said, I'm not seeing any data in this performance management system for this department, department. I said, yeah, they haven't sent us to it yet. They haven't given us to it. His first response was, are you going to be there for the next couple hours? I said, yeah, we're all morning. The first ones will be down in about 20 minutes. So my partner and I looked at each other and said, okay, I'm going to take a bet. Who walks in the door first within 20 minutes? Well, they started lining up.
Don't come here, please.
So because the minister just called them up and said, you committed to getting that data into the system and it's not there. You will go down and give it to the guys now. So this is a culture change, and that's one of the things you see in performance management systems is people don't want to let go because maybe there's going to be some cases where the data doesn't look so well. But the whole point of the strategy is to address that and say, why? How do we fix it? Not to get on anybody's back, but how do we fix this? Because the strategy is what's going to make the organization successful. Good question.
Great, typing as I go along. Dr. 3M, how can you assign the overall maturity level if the organization scored different levels of maturity on each dissension?
Dr. 3M, good to hear your name there. And once again, you do on the disaggregated approach where you've stratified, like in the organization, you got the exec level, you got the directors level, you got the department heads, you got operators, whatever you call them. You can create that disaggregated number for each function or each department or whatever, however you coded it. But at the end of the day, you do have to collect those as a group. And that's where I say you do the simple average and see what the number comes out to be. It's very revealing, but I think that's what you were asking is how can I get it very specific? And that's the level of disaggregation, or what I call custom links into the survey or the questionnaire that identifies what group this is coming from. Even taken to its extreme, you could literally have a specified link in an organization that hits at the department level, hits at any teams that are in that department. And then eventually, if there's anybody that's not on a team, you could create an identified link for the individuals. Now you've got total disaggregation and view as to what's transpiring with their views of strategic management maturity.
Okay. Let's see. All right, Greg said thanks. Let's see if we got someone else. I think Daniel, did I ask this? Thanks, Joe, for the great presentation. How can I assess outcomes on a quarterly basis?
Oh, very, very good. You could go out, you can go out to our website and see the version of the SMMM that's on there. But if you wanted to do it on a quarterly basis, we should probably strategize over a call about what's the best way to do that. Only because I am sensitive when we go into organizations or called in to do this, that I don't want to walk into a firestorm of people being out of gas and out of energy answering surveys or questionnaires. You have to, and of course, what goes with a quarterly assessment on something like this also kind of begs we're going to see some quarterly change. And that might not always be the case on some of these things. I would recommend minimum probably to start out 2 times a year. Beginning of the year, halfway at the end of halfway through the year, and then maybe, very quickly in January. Now that's also though, you got to be careful about the bias of holidays and that kind of stuff makes everybody say, well, everything's great. I'll just answer it like that. But quarterly, the other thing you could do on quarterly too, if the population is big enough, is to create the statistically significant sample sizes and use it that way. If you got a big population, it doesn't really matter. But if you got a big population, you can create statistical sample sizes so nobody gets hit anytime within the 12 months. Or if you wanted them to get hit every couple of quarters, that'd be something else you can put together. Good question.
Okay, Joe. So I think that's it.
Okay, great. Good
There were just
questions.
some questions around the recording and so forth. And yes, it would be published. You can follow us on LinkedIn, either Strategy Plus Consulting or Balanced Scorecard Institute. You can check on the website. I think I put that in the chat at www.balancedscorecard.org, and then there's Strategy Plus Consulting.org as well. So let me just share screen.
Oh, I'll get out of this one.
Sure.
Okay.
Quickly, so that we can jump right in. You just maximize. Can you see my screen there, Joe?
No, it hasn't come through yet.
Is it up now?
Nope.
All right, let me escape again.
While you're getting at that, I just want to tell the audience, don't be shy about sending an email. You've got my email address with a question. I always like questions about this MMA stuff, so be happy to answer or take a phone call. Yeah.
Can you see now?
Yep.
Great. Just minimize this. All right, so guys, just gonna run through a brief marketing presentation for the Caribbean Summit coming up. And our tagline is, what's your story? It's important to know your story, your strategy, your organization strategy story, that is, as an employee, as a manager, as a leader, yeah, as a board member. Critical. That's why we chose that. So our goals, and even though I know that we have like 150 plus people on right now internationally, you hear a lot about the Caribbean, but we welcome all of you. Yeah, feel free to attend. The key strategic goals for us is really to improve the regional and global impact of Caribbean businesses and its stakeholders, and to enable the shaping of our Caribbean collective future through effective strategic planning, and just to increase the competence just in general in the region. While I know strategic planning is a function or an area of expertise that's not too popular globally, from what my colleagues at BSI has shared, in the Caribbean, I think we can still do better. So it's 2 days. It will be in September, which is next month, on the 29th of September. We have the first event, we have broken up into 2, is the symposium or the conference. And then event 2 is on the next day, on the 30th, and that's a 1-day strategic planning course. We call it Balanced Scorecard Strategic Planning Essentials. In case you're interested, anyone on the call who has not attended any of our programs, or maybe you've attended the KPIs, but you've not had any formal exposure to strategic planning, this is a course for you. So this just a bit about me. I'm the founder of Strategy Plus Consulting and the Chief Strategy Officer, but more importantly, Strategy Plus Consulting is a global partner of the Balanced Scorecard Institute for the Caribbean region. So anything you need, please feel free to reach out and we'll try to facilitate with our partners, the Balanced Scorecard Institute. So a little bit more on the summit. We will have almost the full team, the very senior leadership team of the Balanced Scorecard Institute speaking at the event from expert standpoint. Our keynote addresses from the Howard Rom. And then we have our CEO, David Wisely. And then we have Joe, of course, who you met today, and Terry, who's their training director. They will be giving the key or feature lectures throughout the summit. And then joining us at the strat table, we're inviting you to join us at our what we call our red strat table, and that would be for our regional CSS panelists. Good, so we have regional leaders from across the Caribbean, hailing from Antigua, from St. Lucia, from Trinidad, Jamaica, and we want to hear from them. We want to hear what's their story in their own organizations and what we have been doing in the Caribbean and getting it right from a strategic planning perspective. May not be the Balanced Scorecard in particular, but maybe some other methodology that they're using. But we want to know that you're using some type of process. There's some method to the madness in terms of what are you using to craft your strategic plan for your organization, and going through that whole process of execution, monitoring, evaluation, measurements, and that kind of thing. We also have some strategy officers and strategists joining us as well, like Adam and Robert, who that's their main function in the organizations that they hail from. Red Strat table panel details. So 3 panels it will have. 9 to 12 regional industry panelists, industries like retail, oil and gas, finance, fast food, government. 3 to 4 members per panel will run about 60 minutes. So that will be in between the discourses from the BSI team. There will be an opportunity to ask questions from both the BSI speakers and from our regional speakers as well, or regional panel members. And we'll be hearing strategic insights, as I mentioned, just talking about what are some strategy enablers and challenges, some lessons learned that they would have had. This is what the agenda looks like, just at a glance, what I had just been explaining with our keynote and feature speakers, and then our red strap panels in between there. And then you can see the topics we'll be covering on our panel. So methodology, strategic mapping, performance management, culture, communication, change management, execution, analytics, monitoring and evaluation, performance information systems, etc. And our keynote address would be on surviving ground zero using the 5 Ys and H's of strategy. Yeah, and I guess you can see the others there as well. And feel free to go up on our event landing page to get it in detail. All right, so Balanced Scorecard Essentials overview. Just a little bit about that, just being a one-day interactive experience designed to help Balanced Scorecard team members, or even if you're not a team member or a strat planning member, it's a great program to attend to just get your feet wet in terms of BSI's 9 steps to success. That's their framework that they use, international framework, tried and proven, use it all the time. If you want, you can reach out to us and we can send a comprehensive brochure to you so you can see the entire course outline and see if this is something that would add value for you and your team. Yeah. So I'll be closing on No Man Can Walk Out on His Own Story. That's from Rango. I have a toddler, so I watch cartoons, right, guys? But that one always resonated with me, and I said that I would use it at my next presentation. And because our tagline is what's your story, I thought this would be fitting. So as an organization, and as leaders, we have to have a buy-in in our organization story. We have to share it with the rest of the organization. We have to get the rest of the organization to believe, to buy in, and to sell it, to own it, down through the tiers that Joe would have covered, you know, from corporate to department, to team, to individual. Yeah, or else basically the goals, the culture, everything basically falls apart, and that's what we don't want. Yeah, that's the message here. Good. So register now. You can either email us, you can go up on our website, or even BSI's even, or give us a call. So thank you so very much, Joe. It was a pleasure having you as always. I've worked on a number of engagements with Joe as well. Very efficient, very effective, very knowledgeable, definitely an expert. So we were happy to scoot him away for an hour. Thank you so much again for that. Thank you, Candice, also for coordinating. Thank you so very much. And thank you to everyone, as I said, from across the globe who attended. Happy to have you. And hopefully we'll see you at our next webinar in our webinar series, CSS Summit.